What is up, guys? Hypertrophy coach Joe Bennett here with a Ronnie Coleman leg day workout review. In case you're new here, I do have a little bit of an overview video before all of these, so if you want to go back where I give a little bit more context about everything Ronnie Coleman and his workouts as far as what I'm reviewing, go check that out. But again, if you're new here, what's the purpose of these? What do I do different than everybody that's doing all these reviews out here right now? First and foremost, the thing that I do slightly different is I consider myself more of a mechanics guy, which just means physics applied to the body. I'm not a keep up with every single research study, reading it, start to finish that just comes out. I'm not a huge physiology guy. I like to say, okay, training at the end of the day is force applied to the body. So let's look at some things that are pretty much factual. Where is this force applied? Where is that force relative to trained joints? Things like that. So just helping you guys, again, get your head wrapped around, again, what exercise is and not get so fixated on the tools where, working out is not just, I have to complete these exercises. Working out is more so, okay, well, maybe I'm going to train this muscle, which influences this joint in this specific position. From there, because of that, I don't frame things a whole lot in the ways of just good or bad or right or wrong, because very little of anything in life is like that, let alone training. And with specific to reviewing Ronnie's workouts, if you missed the first video again, I think Ronnie Coleman is awesome. I think he's the GOAT. I think overall his training was amazing. There's just so much awesome stuff about his training. I literally was watching this video 20 years ago obsessively over and over and over, thinking it's awesome, thinking this is the definition of what training should be. And to a lot, I still think that. So, we're going to talk about all the things first and foremost that he did right and things that you guys can learn and take from him. But there also is this asterisk of most normal people that have been around this for a little bit of a period of time understand that training is just a stimulus applied to a body. If you don't have the same body as Ronnie Coleman, it's pretty safe to say that stimulus might not have the exact same effect on you. And so again, people will point out the drug component. He was a professional bodybuilder. It's because of drugs. And the genetic component, I want to highlight the genetic component is by far the biggest thing that creates outliers and the biggest things that will create different responses from individual to individual. So as we're looking through this, because of that genetic component, sometimes the things that Ronnie did that might not be, hate to use the term, but this most optimal type deal, it was still adequate stimulus for him. I mean, we look at him, I've discussed it in several of the videos, Ronnie didn't need to be any bigger. All the body parts we're looking at today didn't need to be any bigger. So what he did worked for him, period. But again, because you're not him, we might explore some different options. And then you'll see kind of in the overview video, if I haven't watched, obviously orthopedics a thing there as well too. So I don't know how Ronnie felt during all of these things. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So without further ado, we're getting into his first exercise here for leg day. And again, if you don't know this already, he has basically like an A-B rotation. So I'm covering basically all the workouts that are within his unbelievable video series. He has the entire other B component of his rotation in the cost of redemption. And so again, if you're not familiar with that, it means basically he did kind of a push-pull lower where you train his entire body twice over the course of a week, and he'd have a leg workout that he'd do one day, and then he'd have another leg workout he'd do later in the week, and he'd just repeat between those two, which is a great way to do your programming. So again, this is not the exact same workout that he did another time during the week. And so starting with front squats, a couple things I want to point out here. First and foremost, anytime you're doing a free weight squat, this will just be more quad dominant, so more quad involvement and a little bit less hip and internal erector involvement compared to a back squat. So anytime you're doing a back squat, especially maybe even a low bar back squat, in general, not in general, for the same person applied the same way, same center of mass, base of support, all that kind of stuff, obviously the center of mass changes with that bar placement, is if you have a back squat, you're gonna have more horizontal of a spine, you're gonna have more closed hips, and all of that stuff is gonna be further, again, your hips, your erectors, all further from that bar path, so it'll be more hips. That being said, this is still actually a lot of hips. There's actually more hips working here than there are quads, but just in general, comparing the two, this is more quad dominant. So I like to say, starting with this, if you're looking for overall lower body development, this is why free weight squats kind of have an advantage, depending on how you want to look at the word advantage, as far as they involve more things. Now again, the more advanced you get, which is ironic because Ronnie is about as advanced as you get, meaning the amount of muscle you have, I totally understand the argument sometimes of steering away from one exercise that trains a lot and instead doing multiple exercises that has more, specific stimulus per body part, with this idea of minimizing just, systemic fatigue, all sorts of fatigue, whatever it is. So again, this is why some huge people now these day and age might, instead of doing a front squat, which is a lot of quads, a lot of glutes, a lot of adductors, they might instead in their program do a hack squat, which is going to be way more quads relative to this and a little bit less hips. And then they might do something like maybe a thrust variation or adductor, actually training the adductor machine to still get those body parts, but just broken up so the one exercise isn't so demanding or fatiguing. And again, this is where it comes in. A lot of people will argue, what's the better way to do it? There's too many variables in there. So again, a lot of people don't have all those machines that I said. Maybe they don't have a good hack squat. Maybe they don't have an adductor machine. Maybe they train in their garage, and then they'll watch some optimal kid that's been training for 5 minutes and teaching other people about how to train for 4 minutes, and saying that a front squat isn't optimal, and list all these reasons, which again, is with a bit of truth. Is there a lot more going on? Yes. Is there a lot more fatigue, again, from this one exercise compared to those little individual ones broken up? Yes. Is there more to coordinate here? Yes. For some people, is this ridiculously uncomfortable to hold the bar there, so they focus more on that than they do on the exercise? Yes. But for some people, those things aren't that big of an issue. So again, if his upper back's not fatiguing, if that's not too hard for him to hold, that's not an issue. The more he can make this look like he's in a Smith machine, also the less that lack of stability is an issue. That's the thing that kind of bothers me about lack of stability. Again, I could do a 60-minute video on why things being more stable is superior for hypertrophy. That being said, it's still individual. So again, if we have basically that bar has to stay over his base of support, that center mass right over his base of support, the less it deviates off of that base of support, the less energy expenditure it is to actually stabilize that. So to say that it's stabilizing is a waste of energy it's not the same energy expenditure for everyone. So if you have someone that isn't very coordinated, isn't very good at this, isn't very strong, and that bar is moving all over the place, the lack of stability is a bigger issue for them than someone else that can maybe make it look like a Smith machine. Whole lot of setup there, but I think all that kind of stuff is important. That being said, with all that information, do you prefer doing things more stable? Great, have at it. That's a great approach. You can get huge doing that. Do you like doing exercises like front squats or even a safety bar squat or sometimes a heel elevated squat, and it's not really an issue for you to stabilize? And again, the test for is stability an issue or lack of stability an issue is it hindering your ability to progressive overload? So we'll see that Ronnie goes up to 6 plates here. So I'd say it's not hindering his ability to progressive overload. Now, if that's, again, every single time you front squat, you're just focused on balancing and coordinating and the skill of front squatting and you never get any stronger, then it's going to be an issue. If you progress way faster on a hack than you do on a front squat, then maybe do a hack. But if it's not a problem and you're like Ronnie and you get up to 6 plates and you get it with good form, good for you. You're going to have huge quads. So what's the goal here? This is a tricky one actually because of how massive Ronnie is. And I've had one of my longtime training partners was Ben Pekolsky, who at the time and still in some people's mind arguably had some of the biggest legs of all time. He did have some of the biggest legs of all time in bodybuilding, some of the biggest quads and hams, just, a guy that walked around a lean, 300 pounds pre-contest. It's ridiculous. And so I say that because sometimes when I look at this, a nerd or someone else, even myself, might be inclined from this angle. I really wish we had a different angle from the side to say, is that full knee flexion? Full knee flexion being defined by tissue for pretty much everyone. When is your hamstring smushed into your calf? It's really tough to tell from this angle. Not that it really matters if he's a little bit short of that, but lots of times with people that are so ridiculously huge, it looks like, oh man, they should be going deeper. But if I had an angle from a side, and again, especially with someone like Ben, who actually had bigger calves than Ronnie Coleman, and hamstrings that were probably pretty comparable, and someone's gonna yell at me for that, but hey, it's true. It would look like, man, can he go deeper? Maybe if he didn't have any tissue, he could get his bones closer together, but literally it was just tissue smashed into tissue, and his full knee flexion almost looked like a parallel squat. So this might be full knee flexion for Ronnie. We don't really have a great angle on a couple of the heavier ones. It looks like he's staying a little bit short of that, but we'll see in the next exercise, he for sure gets that full knee flexion. So if we're looking at quads, that's what I consider a complete quad workout. Again, same as every other muscle group. I think you really want to make sure that you overload the mid to lengthen range. And so again, if we're going to draw, this is Ronnie's hypothetical. This is his upper leg. This is his lower leg. Sorry, nerds that want me to use bones. So this would be somewhere near a fully shortened quad. Again, we're not going to talk about the rec fem. So again, a straight leg, this would be somewhere fully shortened. And again, depending on the individual, this would be something like a fully lengthened quad, where again, at this point in time, this is calf, touching hamstring, smush, and you can't actually flex your knee any further than this. This range of motion in here, that's pretty much the full contractile range of motion of the quad. So again, if this is the fully shortened position, then I would say obviously the goal would be, if we're not going to go all the way to that fully shortened position, train the majority of that. Now again, you can still train it fully short, but just prioritize the mid and lengthen range. So meaning you don't need, in my opinion, to go to a full knee extension. You don't need to incorporate leg extensions or something that loads full knee extension every single workout. Or if you do, I prefer putting it later in the workout. And there's a bunch of exceptions on that when it comes to an individual. So that's the main thing I want to point out for front squats. He's got a great exercise pick here as far as overloading the mid to lengthen-ish range of quads. And then also, again, Ronnie is known for his overall leg development. You'll see in some of these, it's just, you know, if you have Ronnie legs, you can absolutely wear these tights and they look awesome. You can wear these boots and they look awesome. You could wear a tank top sometimes he does in his upper body, still huge. Just normal people, when we train legs and all the blood flows out of our upper body, we feel sad. And we have to wear like quadruple XL shirts. At least that's me. So great exercise for loading mid and lengthen range of quads. Great exercise for a ton of glute stimulation. Again, Ronnie's very well known for his glute development. And then also there's going to be, hams aren't the only thing really doing a whole lot here. Adductors are getting some good stimulus as well too. So we'll watch through. He does warm up with 135. I just want to make sure that I got kind of pause on the bottom here. And then he works his way through. I like when you're Ronnie how you do your warm-ups. So you can see he's smushing his hamstring into his calf there. I might have even missed a little bit of the bottom because he goes quick-ish. So I have a hard time pausing when he's down there sometimes. And then he just skips because who else? Why would you waste time with 315? He just goes right from 225 to 315. And again, if you look at his form, there's a lot of stuff, I talked about this in an overview video, where some people look and say, hey, this is kind of quick-ish. He's staying in the range of motion where it's the hardest. He's really not sinking in to the point where he's actually relaxing anything at points. Some people, when I say if there's a too deep point in your squat, is when people go all the way down to the bottom and literally just sink in and relax and let their spine round. So even though he has a little bit of a quicker cadence, he's staying, again, in that range of motion where it's challenging, and it still looks controlled to me. Now, again, at home and myself personally, I like maybe a little bit more deceleration into the bottom. I like a little bit of a pause at the bottom, especially if you have a tough time maybe saying, hey, do I really feel my quads in the bottom or really feel my glutes in the bottom of the squat? Considering that's the most important part of the range of motion, I can't really argue against having a little bit of a pause there. And I could make an argument for orthopedic issues. Maybe that's a good reason to pause there as well too. Putting on the knee wraps, I'm just gonna address this because I get asked this a lot. What are my thoughts on knee wraps? In general, if you're ever gonna use anything, like Ronnie's doing here, is how I recommend doing it. Do as many of your sets as you can without them. Like if you don't have any knee issues, knee pain, whatever, then don't use them. And then the way that I first started using sleeves, for most people, if you don't have knee pain, I generally recommend not using wraps. I would recommend sleeves first. Start with the thinnest sleeve that you possibly can. One, they do help a little bit. And there is a little bit of an argument for too much compression kind of rubbing on your patella while you're going up and down. Can't speak definitively one way or the other on that. But if you're going to use them sparingly. So again, a way that I would use sleeves is I literally probably trained 15, 20 years without ever using a sleeve, and then I started to get a little bit of knee issues, and so I just start wearing them sometimes on my heavy sets. So I would in general, but again, I have no idea what Ronnie's got going on with his knees. I'm sure he's doing what's best for him to actually be able to perform at this point in time. Again, this is the stuff that gets taken out of context by the nerds. You know, he's about to, I think he's still at this point in time, I don't remember the context of the video, 5 or 6 weeks out from the Olympia. So he's got to get stiff done. This isn't something where you sit nerd and like, oh, I shouldn't be wearing that, blah, blah. No, he's got to do his heavy sets of squats here. He's got to make sure he's getting all of his workouts in, hitting the weights that he wants to hit, maintaining the amount of muscle. They're still growing at this point in time if you're Ronnie. So sometimes you just got to do what you got to do if it's a sport. Now, again, if you're a normal person just trying to get big quads, there's almost no reason to have to do something that causes orthopedic pain. Again, I need to highlight, as always, the anabolic pants of Brian Dobson. And again, if you're new here, Brian Dobson is awesome. I don't know him personally, but everything about him seems like just an all-around awesome human being. And just for no other reason, his relation with Ronnie and how selflessly he helped Ronnie, and then just being around during this time, this epic era of bodybuilding, when I was still, how old was I? When I was still younger. It's just awesome. So this is all in good fun. They definitely had better clothes back then. Now everybody's wearing, I don't even know what kids are wearing these days. Young LA, and is that a thing, right? What else is out there? Gymshark? I hate to say it, sorry, no trash talk to those companies, but this is vastly superior. These are vastly superior to anything Gymshark's got going on. Sorry guys, it just is what it is. Anyway, so top set here. Now this is where we get into, he's got 6 plates. So we're just gonna watch Ronnie Coleman front squat 6 plates casually. He says afterwards on this that he got the bar moving a little bit quicker and was actually bouncing a little bit more at the bottom than he wanted. And you can actually see how it whips, and especially how quick he comes up at the top, which is just ridiculous. He was saying he was having a hard time dealing, because that's when you get that bar moving that way in general, if you're ever gonna work out, then watch this. Oh, dump, sorry. I don't think he gave Brian a warning on that. He says, that's all right, you're on, you can do whatever the hell you want in my gym. but just make sure you don't do that without telling your training partner. That could be terrifying. But he basically said the bar was bouncing and whipping, and he kind of felt like it was getting a little bit out of control. So if there is a point where pace or tempo should be, arguably, where would you want to limit it a little bit of speed, especially with that kind of weight? Most people, 99.9999% of people obviously are not going to front squat 6 plates at any point in time. But most people also that are capable of actually doing that can't accelerate with the amount of speed that he did with that first rep. And I think he just kind of got it moving a little bit quicker than he intended to. I like how if you're at your gym, you just got guys that can casually pull 495 off the floor together to put it back on the rack. And so then he basically does what's called a back off set these days. But Ronnie just said, he wanted to do another set because he wasn't too pleased with that set. And so let's go ahead and watch. I think he casually does these 4, 8, 9 reps, 495. He's nice enough to put this back on the rack for Brian. But again, same thing, a little bit of a quicker pace, a little bit of a quicker cadence, but still spends the entire time in the range of motion where there's, and when I say again, it's not even just about the fact that he's staying in that kind of mid to lengthen range, that's part of it, but he's also saying where joint torque is highest. So again, when his femur is parallel to the ground, that is when joint torque will peak for both knees and hips. And when I say knees and hips, I mean the musculature around that as well, which is obviously what we're training for. So overall, great exercise to start with there. But again, make that your thing. My favorite quad workouts for a normal person generally still incorporate a free weight squat because of the amount of stimulus that you're gonna get for a little bit of everything. I always like to make them a little bit more quad dominant unless your goal is glutes, but I still like to say, hey, we're gonna get some extra adductor and glute stimulus, fine. If you're one of the people that's literally at the peak of you really wanna manage as much excess fatigue as possible because you feel like you're at the limits of recovery, then that can be an argument of maybe not having a free weight squat. But free weight squat, great place to start. And then I love the sequence of going right to a hack. So again, we're gonna pause on these. These are awesome. So this is where I said before, let's see, my pause. There's a couple different spots here, but you guys already see going down there. There we go. So this is right here, so for semantic reasons, because again, you don't have to have your feet directly below a bar, basically, like you do with a free weight. He can take his feet up a little bit higher and get his hips in a position he really couldn't from a balance standpoint with a squat, and then he can really nail this angle here. So again, this is about as close as someone with as much tissue as Ronnie Coleman can possibly get. So even if he missed full knee flexion before, he's definitely getting it here. So again, between the two exercises, I wouldn't consider this redundancy. I would consider this for sure getting that lengthened position, which I think is always worth training. And then now he has a little bit of that stability component. So if he was expending a little bit of energy, where obviously he didn't take those really to task failure, he took it to the point where he just was really, really hard and then dropped the bar. And these are ones where he can just get in and work and not have to worry about balancing stuff, so much. So again, hacks, awesome overall selection for more quad dominance. And so what do I mean? Like what makes these more quad dominant? Just the quick show on here if we can get a side. I just want to show Ronnie his legs from the front. They don't even make sense. Let me go back. Some of these videos are just going to be looking at Ronnie's legs. He's got Mr. Olympia on your yellow pants. If you got Mr. Olympia on your yellow pants, you can wear yellow pants. And why are his biceps so pumped? Why are his biceps still bigger than my quads while he's doing a bicep workout? And just looking at his legs while he's like here, they're just like impossibly big. They just don't fit anywhere. He's like running out of room. His legs are on top of his legs and top of his legs. And I think he's casually doing, we get 7 plates here aside, 8 plates aside. So casually doing 8 plates aside, full depth on the hack squat. And so I was going to say where I was saying before, I don't know if we have a good side view, but I'll do my best. There we go. That's pretty good. Thanks, Ronnie, for the side view. So the line of force is in a fixed spot basically here. So it's going to basically go somewhere. Oh, what happened to my pen? So it's going to go somewhere kind of at that type of angle. And so we can look at that from the ground up, and that's a combination of pushing straight down and actually resisting your feet sliding up. So again, think about that. If the platform was made of ice on a hack squat, your feet would want to go this way. If they're not sliding that way, it's because friction force is holding them in place. So the combination of a line of force straight up and a line of force, so if that doesn't make sense. So there's a line of force going straight up here, and there's also a line of force that's keeping your foot from sliding. When you combine those two lines of force, you get a result, and you don't have to know all this, I'm just gonna go through this kind of fast. Those two line of forces combine, so if one's going this way, so again, if you are pressing down to a platform and the platform doesn't break, the force is coming this way. You combine those two, and they form between those two, the kind of the middle of those two, and it depends a little bit on how hard you're pushing and stuff, gives more of this angle of a line of force. And so why is this important? It stays pretty much in the same spot relative to your hips the whole time. So if you're from the top to the bottom, yes, there is some hip involvement, but as you go from the from the top to the bottom, this distance, which is that moment arm thing, only gets longer. So hips stay the same, and then it just gets more torque, more torque, more torque, more torque for your quads the whole way down. That's the main reason it's so much more quad dominant than a free weight squat, whereas you're doing any type of free weight squat, regardless of if it's super quad dominant, heel elevated, whatever, even if you're trying to make it as quad dominant as possible, your knees are going forward and your hips are going back at the same time. There's no way around it. There's no one keeping their hip joint completely perfectly underneath, unless maybe you're doing a sissy squat. And generally then, unless you're very coordinated, you can't really load that per se. You have to kind of balance or offset that. So I want to go over that one real quick. And then we're gonna move on to parking lot lunges. So if you don't know about this, Ronnie is famous for doing his parking lot lunges. And this is one of those things that's just awesome because it's probably, again, 140 degrees in Texas, and he's just walking around in the parking lot. So I'm not gonna go into these too much. I still, I hate to say like, for lack of a better term, but I think walking lunges have a lot of merit. Now, if it were someone else, I don't know what kind of mobility Ronnie has. I don't know what his tissue really allows, but for the average person, he's still getting around 90 here. He's still getting around 90 at the hip. So he's still kind of going to mid-range of both hip and knee. If you've got more range of motion, and like I said, I have no idea what that much tissue feels like on the lower body. So he might literally, with all of his body weight and that, be pushing in there, and he can't really get it much deeper. But if you at home don't have this much muscle, and if you're watching, I know you don't, go deeper. So again, it's a little bit arbitrary, but if you can go with just your body weight and comfortably drop that knee down to the ground, then there's no reason not to drop that knee down to the ground and pick up a little bit more range of motion both at the hip and the knee. So again, I've always, for normal people, liked walking lunges for, again, just some more overall lower body stimulus. So it's good quads, it's good hip musculature, glutes, adductors, all that good stuff. But I totally understand the argument, again, for stability. Some people just can't balance on this at all. So you can perform and produce all the exact same angles. So at the bottom, whether it's, you're doing this type of thing. So here's the trailing leg, here's a foot, here's a foot. So if your goal is, again, we're not gonna think too much about exercise, we're gonna think about muscles. We want this knee angle, we want this hip angle back here, big old butt back there. Sorry, I'm 12 years old. But if we want to reproduce these angles, we can reproduce those angles somewhere more stable. So if you don't like walking lunges, or again, that stability thing becomes, it's more of a coordinated skill than it is something you can progressive overload, then you could do these literally just holding on. So you could somewhere have like, a bar and a rack, holding onto a dumbbell, holding onto something, or a Smith machine, obviously, is an amazing option. So again, if you're gonna incorporate these in your programming somewhere else, I'm not gonna nerd and say that these are a complete waste of time, because again, from personal experience, even now, I can still comfortably work up 150 plus pounds on my body and walk full range of motion. Balance isn't really a big issue. I've been doing them for so long when I was competing, 225 plus. So progressive overload, balance and stability for me personally was an issue, and there's lots of people in the same boat. I know people that can do this with like 315. So obviously the skill component's not limiting their ability to progressive overload, but some people, whether it's just a pain in the butt, it is a huge pain in the butt to get a bar on your back. Ronnie just kind of casually puts it up there, especially with a lot of load. If you don't have a rack to take it in and out of where you can walk, just go on a Smith. It's exponentially easier. And again, I do understand the whole stability component, but it is just awesome just to watch Ronnie Coleman do a bunch of walking lunges, rest on his Viper in between. This is like I think this is 2000. I said this in one of the other videos. I think this is right before the 2000 Olympia. So Ronnie's still peak, and Vipers are awesome. That was like one of my favorite cars back then. And he's lunging along. Then at the end of the workout, he does leg curls. So again, overall, if we're nitpicking here, is there maybe a little bit more motion through the pelvis and the thigh than ideal? It's honestly not bad. I mean, there's some people where they have this huge angle. Let's see if I can get my pen back. There we go. Oh, now we gotta go back. The more angle change you have at your hip. So again, if you're trying to, because your hamstring crosses over your knee and crosses over your hip. So basically what happens for a lot of people is you're knee flexing. The whole goal of curling that weight up is to shorten your hamstring. So if you're shortening it essentially from this end, it doesn't really work that way. And at the same time, you go from, if we can imagine Ronnie's, let's say this is gonna be tough to draw, but this is his femur sticking. Let's get some of this mess out of here. As he gets from here, and we're looking at this angle here, so we're looking at this angle here, and you tip the pelvis here, and this is the femur here, and this is the hamstring here. This angle is getting bigger. So essentially, as you flex your hips, then basically your hamstring lengthens. So you're trying to shorten it from one end and you're lengthening it from the other end. If you lift your pelvis enough, you're basically just performing an isometric with your hamstring. So think about that. Again, I messed myself up, but hopefully that makes sense now that I'm saying this. So we're trying to knee flex at one end, which shortens the hamstring. But if you hip flex at the other end, it lengthens the hamstring. So that's why people do that. When they're not strong enough to concentrically actually pull up, they will lift their butt so much that they close that angle and they lengthen the hamstring. So you're basically just kind of this back and forth isometric for your hamstring. And again, I'm just saying this so this is for you at home. How do you determine? The more you do that, the less stimulus your hamstring is getting. And so really what I see Ronnie doing here mostly is a little bit of that pickup, but more it's just kind of back and forward a tiny bit. So it's because he's using a lot of load. He's still getting a lot of length change from his hamstring. And again, in nerd world, we could say, yes, he could lock that in a little bit more still, but there's always a balance of this. And this is, Ronnie's just probably too big to do this machine. He literally just looks like, the whole machine looks like it's about to disassemble while he's in there just cranking away on that. So if you guys haven't followed me for a while, I love, if I had to say love, if I have a favorite hamstring movement, it's gonna be seated leg curls. So the only thing that I would say about this whole workout in general is sequence your exercises appropriate to your goals. So if hamstrings are priority, for almost everyone I put hamstrings earlier in the workout, especially something like a seated leg curl. Because as you're squatting, despite what you may have heard repeated at some point in time, as you squat, your hamstrings do the same thing we kind of explained on the cheating lying leg curl. As you squat and your knee flexes, as you're going down, your hamstring gets shorter. So think about coming up. When would your hamstrings work? Are they gonna work? They're gonna contract when you come up through the concentric. So as you come up, yes, they're shortening essentially because your hip is extending and they're hip extensors, but at the same time, your knee is extending, and as your knee extends, that hamstring lengthens. So again, they're doing that kind of isometric thing. They don't really do much at all in the squat. So I say that because you can fatigue the crap out of them before you squat, and it won't take away from your squat performance. And that's based on having done that with literally probably hundreds and thousands of people. So all that being said, what happened? Did I pause it? Or is that the end? That's the end. Oh, we got some stretching. Then we'll pause it on the splits. So again, that's from training. If hamstrings are a priority, I always say start with seated leg curls. Why seated over lying leg curls? Again, seated because it overloads the hamstrings where I think they have the most opportunity to grow in that mid to lengthen range. And if you set it up properly, it's super stable. Where again, you can smash that pad down in your thigh, you can belt yourself in, and especially again, if you have a belt, I recommend getting one. If you don't, sorry. But if you smash your thigh in and strap yourself in, then you also don't expend any energy stabilizing your pelvis or stabilizing your spine. So again, when we're doing the lying leg curl variation, one, I don't think it prioritizes the range of motion where hams can grow the most, but two, there's a lot more energy expending having to stabilize your pelvis, stabilize your spine, and that could potentially fatigue you a little bit and reduce your performance, when you're doing a squat movement. So again, seated leg curls, I would say first if hamstrings are priority, but if they're not a priority, and again for Ronnie, I don't really think they're much of a priority at this point in time, you can put them the same as any body part. If it's not as much of a priority, put it later in your session. And so that was the only thing I'll say. If we watch that back when he's doing the seated leg curl, one, I literally, like I said, I think he's just too big for the machine. Like the whole thing, like I said, just looks generally like it's about to disassemble. But you would ideally want this pad to not move. And again, I don't know about the setup. It actually looks like where it's bolted into the machine is actually moving. So that might have needed actually tightened. So that'd be the ideal, is you want that thigh pad smashed so tight that it's not moving up and down at all. And again, for all we know, it was actually tight before he started the set. And because Ronnie Coleman is so damn big, he may have literally just broken the machine with his massiveness. And if you ever break the machine that you're using because you're so big, then you win at working out. And you don't have to work out anymore. That's that. And then he finishes with splits and stuff because why not? I think it's funny, and a lot of his other body parts, or he didn't finish with any stretching, but to touch on stretching for 2 seconds, I think it's still at this point in time, there's no evidence that there's any detriment to stretching at the end of a workout. And I think there you could point to that maybe there is some benefit, if nothing else, for a calming benefit. I think it would be beneficial for recovery. And there might be some benefit for things where maybe a mobility type thing, stuff like that. But again, the jury's still out on that just a little bit. So if you like stretching, Ronnie Coleman was still doing the splits on stage at this point in time. I think he did them his whole career. I'm probably guessing this is why he's doing this, is because he literally would still hit a split, front double bicep on stage very often. So he wanted to kind of maintain whatever you call that split, not a full split, half split, whatever, more of a split than I could do. So he's probably just popping them off once he's done at the end. But again, there certainly isn't any detriment to doing it at the end of the workout. There might be some benefit as well. So hopefully, per the usual, you guys enjoyed this. You learned some stuff, maybe. So if there's stuff you like, there's stuff you want to see more of, there's people whose workouts you want to see me review more, you let me know. If there's feelings that you have just in general about me, let me know in the comments. About working out, let me know in the comments. About Ronnie, about people in your life. It's a safe space. Get down there in the comments section. And as always, appreciate you guys. Hope you learned something. Until the next one.